So we've got Shakespeare to London, we've found out where the theatres were, what their internal structure was, and how the audience got in, what they paid. Now we need to think a bit about the process of putting on the play itself. To begin with, you need your company of actors and your script. And of course, the marvellous thing about Midsummer Night's Dream is that the scenes in which Peter Quince rehearses his company of rude mechanicals gives you a glimpse of that very process. One thing we need to remember is that there would only have been one master copy of the complete script. The plays weren't printed before they were performed, and there certainly weren't any Xerox machines to provide multiple copies. So Shakespeare would have produced a master copy, which would then have been copied out by the prompter. And what the prompter looked after was known as the book, and this had all the stage directions added into it. The prompter would then copy out the individual parts for each role, and those would be distributed to the actors. And we see Peter Quince doing exactly that, telling his company to take their parts and go off and learn their parts. The parts were written out with the cue lines, the last few words of the preceding speech. So it's quite a difficult idea for us to grasp, but you have to imagine if you're an actor in Shakespeare's theatre, you don't have all the words of the play. You don't have a full script. You have your own speeches and the cues that you have to remember so you know when your speech is spoken. And one of the running jokes in the rehearsal of Pyramus and Thisbe in Midsummer Night's Dream is that people keep getting their cues wrong. They either come in too soon on their cue or they come in too late. And Peter Quince, who's a little bit like the modern stage director, gets very frustrated by this. Shakespeare wrote for a company of actors that he worked with very, very closely. It's clear that from the early 1590s, he's in the same acting company as a group of players, including his close friend, Richard Burbage, who together in 1594 formed a new company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and they became shareholders in that company. They shared out the box office profits between them. So Shakespeare from this point on is writing every part with a particular actor in mind. We've got the cast lists of one or two non-Shakespearean plays of the time. Alas, we don't have the specific breakdown of roles of Shakespeare's own plays. We know that Burbage, as the company's leading actor, would have played the leading roles. He would have been Hamlet and Othello and King Lear. We know that the company clown in the 1590s was a man called Will Kemp, the early 1600s, a man called Armin, Robert Armin. We know they would have played the role of the fool. But the other parts, there has to be a certain amount of guesswork as to which actor played which part. But we do know that there were recognisable types of role. If you think of the phrase, the word typecasting, that suggests the idea. When Peter Quince is casting Pyramus and Thisbe in Midsummer Night's Dream, he says to Bottom the weaver, that Bottom must play the part of Pyramus. And Bottom says, what is Pyramus? Is he a tyrant or a lover? A tyrant demands one kind of acting, stomping around the stage, producing big rhetorical speeches. A lover demands a gentler kind of acting. And of course, Bottom, who really fancies himself as a bit of an all-rounder, says that he could play a tyrant and a lover. One of the actors in Shakespeare's company was called William Sly. And here in the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, there is a very fine copy of an original portrait of Sly, which is now held in the collection of the Dulwich Picture Gallery. So here is Sly. He was one of the shareholders. He almost looks as though he's the sort of chap who could have played Bottom himself. He's got a slightly pudgy face. It's hard to see him in the role of a lover. We don't know much about what kind of roles Sly specialised in, but he does seem to have been predominantly a comic actor, and he was certainly a close friend of Shakespeare, Burbage, Hemming, Condell, and the others. There's a fantastic scene in another play that has a sort of play within a play, inside it. That's a very, very revealing moment in Elizabethan theatre history. It was a play called The Malcontent by a writer called John Marston, but a different writer, John Webster, supplied a kind of prologue to it, an induction it's called. And in that scene, the actors of the King's Men actually come on playing themselves. So you get the stage direction, enter Will Sly, and he's followed by a stagehand. It's an amazing piece of self-conscious theatricality to have an actor coming on playing himself. And Sly comes on with a stool and sits down on the edge of the stage. And the stagehand says, "Sir, the gentleman will be angry if you sit here." To which Sly says, "Well, we may sit upon the stage at the private house. Dost thou take me for a country gentleman? Dost thou think I fear hissing? I'll hold my life if thou tookest me for one of the players." That's a very interesting reference. What Sly is saying is that the private playhouses, which were smaller indoor playhouses for a more elite audience, certain gentlemen in the audience, by paying a bit extra, could actually sit on the stage and have direct banter with the actors. Indeed, Sly goes on in The Malcontent to say that he would have to pay sixpence for a stool. And then he says, "Where's Harry Condell, Dick Burbage?" And those are the other actors in The King's Men. And at that point, they come on stage. And Sly says that he is going to tell the other actors what's going to happen in the play. He says, "I have most of the jests here in my table book." In other words, he's holding a little notebook, and in it, he's got all the jokes. Obviously, the idea is that sometimes in a play, jokes were recycled out of other plays. Like the Pyramus and Thisbe scenes in Midsummer Night's Dream, the induction to The Malcontent gives a wonderful insight into the mechanics of the Elizabethan theatre, and in particular, into the way in which actors were well known to the audience. You did have celebrity actors. Audiences went along to see particular actors, Burbage, Condell, and William Sly.